Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle, the podcast, where we talk about all things good and the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Rafe, and we should have a great show today, I think. That's the plan, at least. We have a couple odds and ends to do, some interesting things that I've discovered and thought about over the past week or so. Since, I go out and I do things when I'm not here behind the mic. And new questions come to me, and then I look them up, and I tell you the question, and then I kind of tell you the answer, and then I hope that will encourage you to go out and do your own investigation into these sorts of things. So, but first, before I do that, thank you for being here. This is a great thing. We are appreciative of all the listeners out there doing that listening thing while we do the talking thing. So, without you, we would not be the global top 10% podcast that we are. And as you know, we can be reached at bufnagle.com. We're all over the internet. Just do a little Bufnagle search, and you can find all the Bufnagling you need to know is out there. And we would love it if you would hit that little subscribe button, the like button, smiley stars, free bananas, whatever it is those little buttons are on your phone and your podcast machine. We'd love to have you hit them. We'd love to have you tell a friend to listen, and if you do, we will reward you with a free episode. And if you give us one of those likes, Zach will get. Zach, what does that get? Zach gets I get pudding. Zach gets ice cream, or Harry gets cookies, something like that. I just know I get pudding, and those other two guys are on their own. And this week they're out both running around doing the things that young guys do, like going to meetings and taking care of kids and fixing dishwashers and stuff like that. So that's what's going on. And we are going to talk today about a couple things. And the first question is a question that popped into my head a long time ago. And I kind of have an answer, but I have a fuller answer now than I had before. And the question is if an octagon has 8 sides, why is October not the 8th month? That's the general question. And you can see that October should be 8, and November should be 9, and December should be 10, and even September should be 7, but they are not 9, 10, 11, and 12. They are not 7, 8, 9, and 10. They are 9, 10, 11, and 12. So how did things get so wrong so quickly here in the world of our current calendar? And that's where we're going to start. And along the way, we're going to talk a little bit about calendars. And we've done this before. We did this way back, way back, 100 episodes or so ago. Back in episode 10, we talked about the hole in the calendar. And I will come around to that. And we're going to talk a lot about how we measure time, and then the question of why do we measure time, and how should we measure time for things that matter to human beings now and back then, and whether we may be fooling ourselves with the precision that we tend to drop on that endeavor. So, all right. So the first thing is this question of October, and we're going to get to that. But the 0th thing, the thing that's before that, is going to be this discussion of days. We're going to start with days. All right. How long is a day? And this is a question that popped into my head a number of years ago as well. And the question is if you're okay, so imagine yourself being the Earth. Okay, you get to be the Earth, and that light bulb right there in the middle of the room is the sun. And if you face the bulb, that's like noon to your nose, right? And right, so that's the people that live on your nose. That's noon there. And if you turn to the left, that's how the Earth spins when viewed from the north. So you spin to the left, and then you come back around. When your nose comes back around to noon, that's a day. And that seems like a pretty obvious thing to have happen, but there's really 2 things going on with that. There is your body spinning around, but as that's happening, you are also moving. You are moving counterclockwise around that bulb in the middle of the room. So the first question I asked with that is, do I measure the time from when my nose is faced right back again to the bulb, or do I wait until a little shorter period of time until my nose is oriented in the same direction in the room, right? Because notice, if I'm moving around the bulb and I move about 1 degree a day, 365 days in a year, and there's 360 degrees in a circle. if I go around that, that bulb in the middle of the room, it's going to take me an extra little bit of turn to get my nose pointed back to the bulb. And if you think about going all the way around the bulb in the middle of the room, that it's going to, by the time you get to the other side, you've done a complete 180, and you're now facing the other side of the room when you are facing the sun. So there's two complete revolution discussions at place here. One of them is this question of how long it is until your face is back facing the bulb. And the second one is how long is it till your face is facing the original wall that you were facing, okay, whatever wall that is. And those are two different kinds of days. And there's actually a third kind of day that I'm going to explain, which blew me away because I only realized this was not in the notes I was looking at last time I looked this up. But the first kind of day is from when your nose is pointing at the bulb until your nose is pointing at the bulb. That's called a solar day. And I always think of it as noon to noon, but it could be midnight to midnight. But then I have to be having my back to the bulb, and that's difficult for me to know how far to turn. So that's 86,400 seconds. So that's 60 seconds times 60 minutes, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day. You do that math and you get 86,400 seconds in a solar day. Now, that other kind of spinning that I talked about, until you spin around and you rotate as you go around the bulb at the same time you're spinning. You get really dizzy doing that, all right? So you go around you're spinning around and you're moving around the bulb. You will notice that you will get back to facing that original wall before you get facing back to the center of the room, to the bulb in the center. And that's called a sidereal day. I think I have that right. Either that or it's a stellar day. These are very close things, and it turns out they don't differ by a whole lot. But that is how far you go relative to a distant star that's out there. I think that's called a stellar day. That's how far till you are out facing the same wall you were before, the same orientation relative to the big grid that the universe sits in. Okay, so that doesn't take you as long as it does to do the solar day where you come all the way around. And this stellar day is 86,164.098903,691 seconds. Okay, so it's a little bit less. It's about 3 minutes and 56 seconds shorter to do this stellar day thing than it is to do the solar day. Now, the other one is the sidereal day, and that is okay. So you got to keep in mind what's happening is the Earth is going around the sun, and we measure important points on that orbit relative to when we get solstices and when we get equinoxes. So if I measure like time from equinox to equinox, what ends up happening is that axis of equinoxes is actually rotating in the bigger sphere of the frame of the stars that sit around that. And it turns out that if you do, there's these 2 days. One of them was the stellar day relative to the celestial reference frame. The other one is relative to the mean vernal equinox. And this you got to start drawing pictures and have little models and orreries and things like that to really get your head around this. But the sidereal day is 86,164.090,530,832.88 seconds. So it's a difference of about 8.4 milliseconds. Okay? That's how much different it is. But that's different enough over the course of thousands and thousands of years to put the equinoxes in different places relative to the stars over the course of time. So the equinoxes, they precess around they precess around. So the stars that we see today, when we are looking at certain the stars that are in the background when we have the equinoxes are different stars than our super great grandkids will have 25,000 years from now. So things will have rotated and moved. They move around. So the important thing to remember is this. There's two ways to measure days. One is relative to nose back to the bulb, and the other one, and that's a little bit longer. That's about 4 minutes longer than if you try to do it relative to a bigger reference frame that's sitting out there. So that's a day, and it seems to me to make sense to measure days if you're a human being, because you want to know like how much sun you have left if you're out, plowing fields, or if you're hunting. How long does it take? Because certain animals move at different times of day. You want to know how long until the sun sets. Do I have time to run down to the creek and fill my water bottle, or should I wait till morning? That sort of thing is an important question you have to ask if you're one of these hunter-gatherer tribey people out there studying how much daylight you have left. So it seems to me to take the day as a measure, as a unit. That's a very important cyclic thing that we're trying to measure, and we have since time. What do they say? Time immemorial, something since time long ago. We have been dividing days up into hours, 12 hours or 24 hours, depending upon you counting the whole day or half the day, just half the day, half the night. And when do you start and stop the day? That sort of thing has been a question. We have pretty much 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of nighttime. That's how it's done. If you build a sundial, you will notice that you can read how much time you have left by where the shadows go for that thing. So days make a lot of sense to me. It's a natural component of the human condition. You sleep, you wake up, you eat, and then you go back to sleep again. And that happens a lot of times over the course of a year. We've talked about years before and how we work typically now in what's called a Gregorian calendar, which was set up by the Pope in 1582 or so, a modification of the Julian calendar. So the Gregorian calendar has 365 days every year, except for every 4 years has 366, except for every 100 years, it only has 365, unless every 400, it has 366. And that's a really complicated little thing. And that if we do this and if we do that thing, that adding the extra day in there is called, those are called intercalary days. And those are not calories like you burn when you eat cookies, but intercalary as in calendaring, as in adding days to make the calendar line up right. If you don't count the days right and you just keep track of your days, eventually your equinoxes and solstice will not end up at the right place. You will not be looking at the same stars during the same time of year, and the animals won't behave the way they do when you try to do those things. So the Gregorian calendar fixed that. They put 365 and 97/400ths of a day per year, and that comes out to that little scheme I just described. That's approximately 365 days and a quarter, just a little bit less than a quarter. The Julian calendar had 365 and exactly a quarter, and that got off over 1,500 years from between Caesar and Pope Gregory the 13th. Did you hear my dog there? I heard the dog. In that 1,500 years, the calendar got off 10 days or so, and they took those days out of the calendar and they readjusted everything. And that's kind of a story. That's a story for a different day. That the basis of that thing is in episode 10. But what's interesting to me is we take the year then, and we just had a new year start, and we started our new year in January, on January 1st. And then we'll go to February, and you guys know the sequence here: March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. And 30 days has September, April, June, and November. And you know how to do that little trick with your knuckles to see which have 30 and which have 31 days. We partition the year into months, and months and moons go together. There's the moon does two cycles around us, two times from full moon to full moon, or new moon to moon. Does two of those about every 59 days. So if you wanted to make a calendar and not worry about where you were relative to the equinoxes, but just worry about the moon, you would have one of these lunar calendars, and they are still in place in a lot of places. The Islamic calendar is based solely on months, on numbers of moons. They do a certain number of moons every year, and because they do that, they have different numbers of days in their years. So their feasts that land on certain months, they move throughout the year. So they move throughout our year, but they don't move throughout their year. So that those things get a little tricky. The Jewish calendar has has 12 months some years and 13 months other years, something like that. So that they kind of add those intercalary years to keep things lined up. Okay, so that idea of taking the solar piece and the lunar piece and mixing them together gives you a lunisolar calendar, and that's what the Gregorian calendar is. It has these 365 and 97 400ths of a day. It has those days divided up into 12 months, and so the Gregorian calendar is based on the Julian calendar, but the Julian calendar is based on it's a Roman calendar, right? And of course, the Romans, what did we learn? We've learned in the past, if we haven't learned anything in this podcast, we have learned in the past that all roads lead to Rome, but in Rome, all roads lead to Greece. And the Greek calendar was the basis for a lot of this stuff. And they had essentially 12 and a half months in a year. But they started in March, like you probably should start. And I think if I was in charge of starting things, I would start counting at the spring equinox. That would be the place I would start, because spring is happy. It's a nice place to start things, and I would start counting on that. But back in the day, the Romans and the Greeks, they would start. The idea of the month was there. A month is a nice period of time that's longer than a day, but shorter than a year. And if you're watching the moon go, and it goes 28 days, you could say, well, every new moon every new moon and every full moon we're going to have a market downtown, and these other days we're going to do whatever we're going to do. Maybe get paid at both of the first quarter and the third quarter. Those are time frames that work well with humanity. I mean, think about it. What if you got your annual salary every year at the end of the year, right? Instead of being paid every 2 weeks or twice a month, whatever you get, or maybe once a week. What if you got paid once a year? That would be a bad thing. So that's a too long a period of time. And getting paid every day is kind of nice, but that might get a little heavy, having to do all that accounting every day. So the idea of a month or a fortnight would that keeps things. How do we say it? It keeps things human, and it keeps things focused for you. So the Romans and the Greeks started off with these things in March, and March is named for Mars, god of war there, and April for Aphrodite, May for Maya, who was the mother of Hermes. Did you know that? Zach probably knew that one. June is for Juno, who was queen of the gods. And then we get to July, August, September, October, November, and July is the 5th month, and it used to be called, guess what? It used to be called Quintilis. And August used to be called Sextilis. So it means that quint means 5, sex means 6, and then September was 7, October was 8. There you go. There's your 8. November was 9, and December was 10. And that gives you these 10 months. It gives you about 310 days a year, something like that. So and then they would put this is where it gets funny to me, is they would add these extra months. They just called it winter. Right. And it just kind of sucked, because it's like it is now, or it's cold out. Nothing's happening. Nothing's growing. We're waiting for spring to roll around. And they just added these days in there. And if you were one of the high priests that were running things, and you had, they would adjust these months to keep things lined up. They would add an extra day to this one or a day to that one. And they would kind of tell you where they are. But this was not a thing that, these calendars weren't published in advance. Okay, you didn't pull out your iPhone and ask whether or not, what day of the week October 13th, 2036 is going to be. You didn't ask that question because it wasn't a relevant question. The years were numbered when they started the councils in March, and they would do councils, a couple days a month, and then come back and do all that political kind of stuff. We still have financial calendars. We have fiscal years, we have school years, and we have different kinds of years that start and stop in different places. And the Greeks and the Romans, they would start counting there in March. And then I've read a number of things on this, and it's really difficult to keep this all together. In 153 BC, there was this rebellion in Hispania, which I think is Spain, and they had to get the government together to figure out how we're going to respond to this rebellion. So they got together in January instead of waiting for March, so they could suppress. Well, that's what you do when you're Rome, right? You suppress rebellions, and they did that in January, and they kind of shifted things to starting in January. So in this winter time, they would add this January and this February thing that they just kind of throw them in there. And that's why the leap days got added at the end of February. And they would do all sorts of really wacky things. There were times when they didn't like months having weird numbers of days. That was bothersome. There were certain numbers that were bad to have. So you didn't want 13 months and days in your month, that sort of thing. But eventually things kind of settled down, and Caesar in 46 BC came up with his Julian calendar for 365 and a quarter days. So that's kind of where that gets us to Julian, and that gets us to Gregory. But we still have these months hanging around here. And that's the thing that surprises me, because months are no longer moons. All right. We don't start a new month with every new moon or every full moon, or however you do that. I got to say, if I was in charge of months, I wouldn't, like, if I was, we already said this, right? If I was in charge of years, I would start them at the equinox in the spring. And if you're in the southern hemisphere, I guess, I don't know, maybe you could start, I don't know what we do. We would have to, maybe we'd have a rock, paper, scissors to see whose equinox we start on. But I would start it in the spring. And I understand that that's northern centric, and there's nothing I can really do about that. I don't want to start it at the summer solstice. That just seems, I don't know, summer's half over, the years, that's just, I think I would start it in the spring. But if, as far as months go, I think I would start it at a full moon. I can't see starting a month on a new moon, which is a moon you really can't even see. Right? How do you know it's there? I guess that's the thing I would never understand. How do you know it's there? Now, I could say, if you want to start when you see the first wisp of a crescent, maybe we could do that. Okay, the crescents is the skinny half before you get to the first quarter, or after you get to the third quarter. But that glob that's not quite full, that's called a gibbous moon. I learned that recently. So you have waxing and waning crescents, and you have waxing and waning gibbous moons. And right now, as I record this, the moon it has just passed full, and it is, I believe it is a waning gibbous. So I had heard that was a question that used to be asked on job interviews to see if you pay attention to things like that. I guess I can't imagine the real practicality of that, other than trying to be a smarty pants. And if you run into somebody who actually knows, then you probably want to hire them. But I guess I wouldn't want to not hire somebody just because they didn't know the phase of the moon. Think about that. We don't live in a world where the phase of the moon really matters, and our months don't align with the moon. So the months don't really mean anything anymore. They are completely vestigial, right? They are left over from design before. They are a piece of us, of our ancestry, that is being carried with us now for no good reason. There is absolutely no reason for that. And you can go back to what the French did in the French Revolution back there in the late 1700s. They tried to jettison everything. They rewrote the months. You guys know this. They rewrote what weeks were. They started their count. They said, this is year one. They did the whole shebang. They went to metric time, and they tried to redefine hours and seconds and things. And the whole thing didn't go very well with them. And there are certain, I think the reason months hang around is, I think, like I said, they're valuable on a human scale, on a human level. They're longer than a day, which is great, but they give you a partition that you can get your head around. I don't know what today is. Today is, I have to think about it, it's the 5th of January, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. It's 9th of January. It's the 9th of January, which is great. 9th of January, 2023. But if you had to tell me, well, today is the 194th of 2023, that would be really hard for me to know exactly where that is. I'd know it's a little bit past halfway, because 180 something is halfway. So it's like 2 weeks past halfway through. And immediately, if you're following along what I'm doing here, you would say, oh, you're like mid-July. So you would have, like, the idea that these months now connote seasons to us, but if we just had numbers 1 through 365 or 6, depending on how you count that, that would be harder. That would be harder if they were just numbered. So the idea that they are vestigial and they carry names, these are ways to give us what I'll call local temporal space. If I say March, we're building a new house, and that should be done in April. that kind of gives me a picture. It's about a third of the way through the year. I kind of know what April looks like to me with buds on trees and little flowers cropping up everywhere. Chance of a little bit of snow maybe at the beginning of the month, the end of the month. I know it's going to rain a lot, April showers. I got Mayflowers. We got Pilgrims, right? But June, July, August, those things, I get summertime, but I understand them from knowing the names of the months, and that helps me keep this thing in a human sense. I don't want to become a computer where I just know the number of the year based on some arbitrary start point and the number of the day based on when that was started counting on January 1st, which had no connection to anything. So we could count days from the years, but you know what? I think we need the months. Okay, so we could throw them out, I suppose, but we would lose our connection with the past. And like that metric system, we did a thing on the metric system. There was one thing I didn't mention when we did metric system is the imperial method that I talked about, the imperial system. It had how do I say this? It has components that are relative to us, right? I know how big a foot is. I can go to my floor out here and I can step off feet. I can step off strides. And these are human-based things, which is kind of good, I think, because it kind of makes it important to us. If you just, we are fortunate that the meter is, think about that. If you really wanted to just base it on stuff, you would just base it on like, a second would be based upon the frequency of a cesium atom or something like that. And you would have all these arbitrary constants that have nothing to do with you. Now, I know how long a second is, right? We know a second is 1 banana, 2 banana, 3 banana, 4 banana. That's how long a second is. I know how long a meter is. It's a little bit longer than my face to the tip of my hand. But the reason we picked the meter to be that is because it's a human kind of thing. And if we throw out those human connections, then the ability to use these things for us instead of us being used by them, that goes away. So I think months are human scaled time measurements that help us help ground ourselves in the year. You could do that based on you can do that astronomically. You can look at which constellations are visible in the sky, and then you would know where you are in the year, in case you can't tell by how hot or cold it is. But I'm wondering why people track the moon anyway. I guess you track the moon because it's something to do, and you see that it changes relatively quickly it doesn't change as fast as the sun does. I mean, the sun rises in the morning, sets in the evening, and the moon rises. All those things rise in the east and they set in the west. But the moon changes its shape over the course of 28 days or so, and that is an interesting thing. And you can kind of, it's a nice thing to measure. Gives you a feeling for that unit of time. So I think that's why they did that. So let me see if I can summarize. We got days, we got years, we got months. Months are simply vestigial things to help us partition the year. Your calendar that you're using right now, your Gregorian calendar, is accurate to, 1 day every 10,000 years or so. Someday they'll have to put another intercalary day in there, but until that time, you shouldn't have to worry about that. So that's the first thing, was on days and calendars and months and how we got there and why October really is the 8th month, even though it feels like it's the 10th one, because we used to start in March where we should start. So it's all good. It's all good. Sometimes things are a little bit arbitrary, sometimes a little bit wacky, but that is okay. The second thing is, last weekend I had this opportunity to visit a friend of mine who lives south of Indianapolis, and as I was going there, I saw this through this little town southwest of Indianapolis called Gosport. I'm learning so much about Indiana. It's kind of fascinating. It's got a lot of history, but it doesn't have history that's really super old. Like, Greece is really old, but Indiana history is not quite that old, at least the stuff that's written down. And there's some nice things to learn. So here in Gosport, Indiana, there's a marker, and it marks what's called the 10 o'clock line. And it turns out there was this treaty in 1809 where William Henry Harrison, who became president in the future, he signed on behalf of the United States and a number of tribes signed on behalf of the people that live there, the natives that live there, and the United States bought the land from the Indians for, I don't know what they paid. They got 3 million acres in this deal, and the 10 o'clock line marks the northern boundary of Indiana based on the Treaty of Fort Wayne in 1809. So the idea was that, they wanted to say, where's the boundary go? And you know how they used to do that. They would say, like, it goes from the mouth of Raccoon Creek into the Wabash River down to this other thing. They do that. But the natives apparently did not like this idea of using the compass, and they would survey with chains. They had chains of length, and they would march them out and they measure with chains. And they didn't like this idea of the compass because it seems like the compass may be fickle depending on if you put a magnet by it or you use it in an area where there's a lot of metal. And not only that, we know that the magnetic North Pole is moving, and it's moving a lot faster now than it ever did before. So I'm not sure. It might flip one of these days again. It has flipped in the past. So anyway, the boundary is defined by a line cast by a vertical spear at 10 a.m. on September 30th. So you go to this one place, and I'm still looking to try to find out exactly where this place is. And you take a spear and you stick it in the ground right at this spot. And then when the sun gets around to 10 a.m., it's going to cast this southeast to northwest shadow, and it's going to draw a line. And that is the line. That was the boundary line they did based on, it's called the 10 o'clock line. And I read a lot about this, and it talks about the staff at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I keep thinking to myself, well, if you've been following the things we've been talking about, time zones and solar stuff, it's like, well, 10 o'clock where? Right? 10 o'clock at that spot? Because as soon as you move a little bit farther west, you can, like, 10 o'clock gets to each spot a little later. But I'm wondering if you, like what if you really tried to do that? If you stuck the spear in the ground at 10 and you had and you could figure out when it was exactly 10 o'clock. Now I went to Gosport. I drove through Gosport, and then I looked it up on the interwebs, and I got its longitude. And Gosport, Indiana sits at 86 degrees, 86.668, let's call it 88.668 degrees west longitude. So if you remember from our episode on how to define the time zones and why Indiana and Michigan should not be on Eastern time, then you will remember that Philadelphia sits at, give or take, 75 degrees west, and St. Louis sits at 90 degrees west. So if Philadelphia is at UTC -5, then St. Louis is UTC -6, and Gosport, Indiana should be UTC minus about 5 hours, 46 minutes, and 40 seconds. Right? So it should be that far over. So if you set your watch to Gosport time at 10 a.m. on the 30th of September, and you stick you got to get a spear. I mean, it doesn't say a pole. It says vertical spear. You got to stick that spear in the ground and make sure bring a level, make sure it's pointing straight up. And then look at that shadow, and that should fall on the line. And but I don't know where the point is either. I know it's somewhere in Gosport you can do that. And I'm guessing anywhere on the line you can do that, and it should match up with the line. But I haven't been able to really determine where these boundaries are. So stay tuned, I guess, for that one. And if you would like to replicate that, maybe you should do that when you lay out your garden this spring. Maybe you should draw a line relative to I don't know a flagpole, maybe a laundry drying pole at a certain time of day at a certain location, according to a certain number of hours set off from UTC. You could do something akin to the 10 o'clock line, and if you do that, let me know. You come on and we'll talk about that. But anyway, those are some things about time, about calendars, and things that are keeping me busy these days. I don't know have you been hearing the dog? She's been barking here quite a bit. That's what dogs are. It's all good things. So anyway, I would like to remind you, as we always do, to seek the good, be the good and spread the good and enjoy the adventure of life.